Welcome, everyone. Let's see, I think we've got about 55 participants in. Thank you for typing in where you're coming in from. So my name is Nadia Yaqub, and I'm an immigration attorney. I've been practicing for over 20 years now. And I've been presenting for Rob's Idea to IPO for the last 7 years. I have been focusing on startups, emerging companies, tech entrepreneurs. That's sort of my practice area for the last 7 years. Before that, I actually was with the government. I worked in the federal courts for 5 years, really focusing on deportation matters, criminal matters. So foreign nationals who were in deportation proceedings or removal proceedings for criminal issues or just for being here illegally. That's what I was working on for 5 years. And then before that, I worked at the world's largest immigration law firm called Fragaman for 8 years. So like I said, I've been practicing for over 20 years. And I actually come to the field because this is very personal to me. My family immigrated to the United States when I was 11 years old by way of Pakistan, Singapore, Malaysia, the UK, and France. And then we ended up in California. And the journey of my father and my dad's two brothers very much, it's the international, they came as international students. One brother was sponsored for a green card by his employer. Another brother married a US citizen, got his green card that way. My dad got a job in Singapore after he finished his studies here. But when his brothers became citizens, they sponsored my dad, and that's how we came. So this is very much part of my family's modern history, the US immigration system. And that's why I really, really love my work. And I love helping people talk about their options for immigrating to the United States, different pathways for them, and coming up with a plan. So with that, I will get started. Just some housekeeping. We are going to ask you to please enter your questions in chat. I'll be focused on the presentation, so I won't be looking at the questions until the end, and then I'll take them one by one. We do recommend that you not disclose a lot of very personal information in your questions because this presentation is shared with all the registrants, which is about 300 people registered for the presentation. And then what we find is that a lot of people who get the slides of my show and a recording of the show do share it with other folks. So then something very personal you've asked could become quite public. So with that, I'll get started with my presentation. Let me give you an overview. Okay, so first of all, we'll just talk about visiting the US for business, because we understand that most of you are entrepreneurs or professionals who want to start possibly your own business here or want to find out about how you can work in the United States. So we'll just start with the very basics, which is visiting the US as a visitor, like business or for pleasure. Then we'll talk about options for you to work as an international student. Then I'll jump into the most common employment-based visas, and I'll really be focusing on the ones that are good for starting a company and the ones where it's much harder to start your own company and sponsor yourself for a visa. I'll do a very quick slide on the avenues for permanent residence. That's not the focus of this presentation, but I'll kind of outline for you what are the ways to get a green card that's permanent residence in the United States. I'll just flag a few of the obstacles to getting your visa. This is something you should be ready, could cause some delays in getting a green card or your visa to visit the US, or it could also be a reason why you would not be allowed to enter. And then I'll just close with the COVID-related travel restrictions that are in place. Fortunately, those are scheduled to lift on November 8th. So I will just cover that for you at the end, okay? So let's talk about coming to the US as a visitor. Now, there's two kinds of visitor schemes. One is the B1, B2 visitor visa. You have to pick it up at the consulate. You get a sticker in your passport. It's usually good for 10 years. Let's see, it's usually good for 10 years. And you're allowed to come in for 6 months at a time. That's usually how much time you are given when you come. The good news about coming in on a B1, B2 visa is that you can extend for another 6 months. So for some of my travelers who are coming from very far away, if they're exploring business opportunities here, they sometimes need a little more than 6 months, and they are eligible to extend it. The other option is the ESTA, and that's available to about 40 countries who can come to the United States without getting a visa. Okay, and they just have to sign up online. It's called the ESTA. They don't have a sticker in their passport. They don't need to go to a consulate. You just come to the United States. It's your visa waived, and you are allowed for 90 days, and that's it. And there's no extensions allowed. The only exceptions are humanitarian emergencies. Like, let's say you have a medical issue and you cannot travel. Last year, COVID was an example where a situation where you could get that extension, and if you marry a US citizen. So those are the three just exceptions to that 90-day limit. Otherwise, you do need to leave the US after 90 days. Now, it's important to remember you cannot work when you come as a visitor, but you can certainly look for business opportunities. Okay. And technically, you're not supposed to come here to look for work either. So you can't come here to work or look for work. But the reality is that people do come in for interviews. You have to be careful about that. But certainly looking for business opportunities, coming for business meetings, that is allowed on the visitor visa. Okay. So that's a nice way to just do some exploring about coming to the United States. Now, another great way to really set up your base in the United States, create that network, really get that experience, is to study here. Now, it is very expensive to study here, but it can be a very good investment if you're planning for your future, or even for your kids, for your children's future. There are multiple ways to be able to work while you are studying. So the most common kind of work authorization program, if you are an international student, is after you finish your degree, you get 1 year of work authorization. So it has to be a degree program. So bachelor's, master's, PhD. Okay. You get 1 year. If you have studied a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, or math, you can get an extra 2 years. So what a lot of my clients do is they come here for an 18-month master's program. Okay, they get this nice US master's degree, and then they get 3 years of work authorization. So that, if you do the math, is a great investment. Now, the other option is to work while you are studying, and that is called curricular practical training. It's not usually available right away. It's for someone who's, in a certificate program, or someone who's already studied here and then signed up for a second master's or a second a certificate program. And those allow you to work during the day and then study at night. So you're still paying for school, you're still going to school, but it's more at night and on the weekends. And a big part of your studies is that on-the-job experience. So that's how you can work while studying. It relates to your degree or your certificate program. Okay, so those are the 3 ways to be able to work while you're studying. And also, again, while you're studying here, you're building that network, which will allow you to find those jobs, right? Once you finish your studies. So that's studying in the US. Now let's talk about the most common temporary employment-based visas, okay? And I'm going to start with the most popular one, and that is the H-1B visa. The H-1B visa is for high-skilled workers, okay? And what does that mean? There are 4 elements to this visa category that you have to satisfy. First of all, the position must require at least a bachelor's degree, okay? So, typically it's like a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, a professor, a teacher, a pharmacist. You need a degree to do this job, an accountant, a graphic designer. That's the job. You need to require a degree to do the job. So it's not a great, you can't get an H-1B to come and work as a salesperson at a clothing shop, right? It's very much high skilled work. The other element is that there has to be an employer who wants you or needs you to work for them, okay? Now, this is important. There's no test of the labor market required here. That's for the green card. And some other countries in the world, you have to show that there's no workers domestically who could fill the job. That is not required for the H-1B visa, okay? There's no test of the labor market, but there has to be an employer sponsoring you. And I'll get into that in a later slide. The third element is that you have to be paid either the prevailing wage, and I'll describe what that is, or what the employer is actually paying people in that role if that salary is higher than the prevailing wage. Okay, and I'll break that down for you in another slide. And then the last element is that there are very substantial government filing fees for the H-1B, and the employer needs to pay it. So you cannot pay those. That is under the law, the employer must pay those fees. And I'll tell you about those fees in a following slide. So about the wage requirement, okay? This is what the government wants to make sure is that H-1B workers who come to the US are paid the salary that most US workers for that job in that area get paid. So the Department of Labor has an online wage library, and you can look up by state, okay? You can look up by occupation and then by level. So there's 4 levels. Level 1 is very junior, level 4 is very senior. Okay, you look up. I just want to make sure everyone is muted. Can everyone just mute themselves, please? Okay, great. Thank you. So you have to be paid at least the prevailing wage. Okay. Now, if you are a company that pays your employees higher than the average salary, so companies like Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they pay way above market because they're fighting for the best talent. So they pay very high salaries. Now, if that's the case, then they have to pay the H-1B worker the same. They can't say, well, the prevailing wage is only this, and I only need to pay that. No, it doesn't work like that. It's you have to pay either the prevailing wage or the actual wage. I understand for a lot of companies that may be smaller, that have never hired a foreign national, oftentimes people ask me, well, what about if like equity or stock options or bonuses? No, the prevailing wage is the base salary they offer you. So one suggestion I have for, let's say you're coming to work for a smaller startup or a small family business in a high skilled capacity, what I recommend is on the wage library, it also tells you an hourly wage. And what you could do is you could actually work part-time. So then you can meet and you can get paid that hourly wage. Okay. So there's ways to work around the prevailing wage requirement, but you cannot use anything like a bonus or stock options or shares to meet this prevailing wage or actual wage requirement. Okay. So now The employer-employee relationship. Definitely what is not allowed is for you to just start your own company and then sponsor yourself. That is not allowed. Because the government wants to see that there's actually an employer who wants to hire you, okay, and that there's work for you. So you cannot start your own company and sponsor yourself. You also cannot be a freelancer to a company. So oftentimes with startups and emerging companies, they don't want to hire people as employees because that means there's taxes and payroll and then all these benefits and vacation. And so they say, I don't want that. I just want to, why don't you just work for me as a freelancer? Well, that's not allowed for the H-1B. You have to be a formal like employee on company payroll, where the employer is paying the taxes for you as an employee, okay? And then the other situation the government doesn't like, so in addition to you can't start your own company and sponsor yourself, you can't be an independent contractor, freelancer. The other thing the government doesn't like are the temp agencies, the staffing agencies. Now, sometimes it works. People do get through, but in general, those cases get a lot of pushback from the government. The government doesn't really like those placement companies. The placement companies do a lot of fraud, frankly. They do a lot of kind of exaggerating what's really going on. And so, you might get approved by the government in the US, but then when you're applying for a visa, you might have problems at the consulate. So this is a harder path if you're just looking for a staffing company. Do people get the approval and the visa? Yes, but it's hard, okay, because the government doesn't like that situation. What the government is fine with, of course, is if you are working for a company, but you're traveling around the US, meeting clients and meeting, customers. So you don't have to sit in one office all day long. You could be off-site. You could be an auditor. You could be a consultant going at a client site long-term, short-term. That's all fine. They don't need to have you physically. And certainly now with COVID, so many people are working from home. So the traditional, you come to the office, here's your little cubicle, you go sit in there, that situation doesn't exist anymore. And the government understands that, but they definitely want that you are an employee, that there's an employer who controls you and tells you what to do. Now, certainly if you co-found a company, with another person, and you don't have a majority interest in that company, it's possible for your company to sponsor you. But again, you cannot be a majority owner of the company. And we need to show that there's someone who could terminate you. Okay, so that's the employer-employee relationship. Now, as I mentioned, there are significant government filing fees that the regulations are very clear that the employer must pay. These are substantial. As I said, it's anywhere from about $1,710 to $2,460. That's the base of government filing fees, and that depends on the size of the employer. Otherwise, if you want to get the case fast-tracked, meaning you want a decision in 15 calendar days as opposed to 2 to 7 months, then you can pay an extra $2,500. And that's called premium processing. And that will get you a decision in 15 days. Okay. So now here's the big issue with the H-1B. There is an annual limit to how many visas, H-1B visas are available. So every year the government only allows for 65,000 H-1B visas to be available. Of those 65,000, almost 7,000 are for individuals from Singapore and Chile, because there are specific trade agreements with Singapore and Chile, which the US government has said, okay, well, for Singaporeans and Chileans, they will get a special H-1B visa. Okay, so let's reduce that. 65,000 minus almost 7,000. That takes us to what? 58,000. And then there's an extra 20,000 if you have a US master's degree. Okay, so and what basically, there are far more people who want the H-1B visa than there are available, right? I mean, every year we have at least anywhere from 250 to 370,000 petitions requested. And so what the government does is they run a lottery, and that lottery runs in the last week. It basically runs in March. And now it's like this 2-week period where employers can register the person they want to sponsor for the H-1B. It's a very simple online registration process. The employer just puts in your passport information, what degree you have, what role you will hold. There's a $10 government filing fee, and it's electronic. And there's, like I said, it's a 2-week window. At the end of that 2-week window in March, there's the last week of March, the US government just runs an automatic lottery. And if you're selected, or if your employer's registration for you is selected, then your employer will be notified. Okay. And then your employer will have 3 months to file the H-1B for you. So usually April 1 to June 30th. And then if the government takes all summer to review the petitions, and then they'll have it approved so that you can start working on October 1. That's the earliest you can start working. Okay, so that's kind of the timeline. A couple of things to know. If you are selected, it's only for that employer. It's not you. The registration really belongs to the employer. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is that actually over the last 2 years, all the registrations that were selected at the end of March, not all of them were acted on. So the government ran a second lottery in July. Okay. So if you're not selected the first time, it's very possible you could be selected at a second try in the summer. Okay. So that's the H-1B lottery. Couple of things. There are certain organizations that do not need to worry about the H-1B lottery. They have unlimited H-1Bs available to them. And that's universities, research organizations that are not profit, right? So like a hospital, a lab, these are nonprofit research organizations that don't have to worry about the H-1B visa limitation. And then, of course, once you're in the United States, if you want to switch employers, you don't have to worry about the lottery. If you're extending, you don't have to worry about the lottery. Okay, so that's the H-1B lottery. One small comment is for next year in March. The Trump administration wanted to organize the registrations actually by salary levels. So they wanted to say, oh, those with the highest salaries get priority in the selection. That was found to be illegal. But now the Biden administration wants to reintroduce that. So it's possible next year in March that when we have the H-1B registration window, the online form will actually ask what level salary you're at. Now, I will tell you that like the universities, a lot of labs, hospitals, a lot of employers wrote and said that this is very unfair, because that means junior jobs can never be filled with the H-1B visa. And that's why the court did find it illegal to organize the H-1B registrations by salary level. But again, the Biden administration is reviewing it. So it's possible that that could be part of the analysis of the H-1B registrations next year. Okay. So now just some details on how long you can work in H-1B status and how much you can or cannot work. So number one, you could work part-time. The minimum is like 20 weeks, but you don't have to come and work here full time on the H-1B. And you could actually have two H-1Bs. Okay. So you can hold dual or concurrent H-1Bs. The important thing to keep in mind is that it's tied to a sponsoring employer. So just once you're in the US on the H-1B, you can't decide, you know what, I'm not going to work for him. I'm just going to go work. I'm just going to drive Uber. I'm just going to do Lyft, or I'm going to work, just do my own thing. That's not allowed. You have to work for the employer that sponsored you. Okay. Now, in terms of how long you can stay in the US, you are able to stay for 6 years. Okay, you're given 3-year approval. So you'll be given 3 years, and then you have to apply for an extension for another 6 years. You can go beyond that 6-year limit if your employer has sponsored you for a green card. Okay, then you can extend your H-1B until you have your green card in hand. Insofar as your family, your spouse and your children who are under 21 can come with you, they get H-4 status. Unfortunately, they do not get work authorization unless you are being sponsored for a green card. But what a lot of the spouses do of my H-1B workers, my clients, is they study and they kind of do the F1 route. And they build their own network and they find their own employers to sponsor them for the H-1B. Okay, so that's the H-1B. I'm going to move now to the next visa category, and that's the L1 visa for an intra-company transferee. This is a great visa option for you, for most of you, from what I can just briefly see, are from abroad. And, if you can find a company that is in your home country and has an office in the US, if you've been working for at least a year for that company in your wherever abroad, you could be Indian but working in Dubai. That's okay. So long as you're working overseas, you can be transferred to a US office after 1 year of working. Now you have to be coming to work as either a manager, an executive, or a worker with specialized knowledge. Now, the important thing to keep in mind, if you're coming in as a worker with specialized knowledge, the government generally isn't persuaded that you have that specialized knowledge after 1 year, right? They're going to say, no, that's not possible. How do you have all this specialized knowledge after just 1 year? So you want to be careful about getting aggressive on the 1 year, timeline, because a lot of people ask me, okay, after 1 year, I can transfer, right? Well, yeah, but we have to make sure that we also meet the requirements that you're coming to manage here, or that you have all the specialized knowledge. But one option for the L1A that is great for those of you who are very entrepreneurial, want to start your own company, or are in a family business where you want to expand to the US, you can actually come to the US on this visa to open a new office. Okay, so long as that new office in the US is legally related to your office in Israel or India or China, you can then be transferred here to open that new office. Okay, so that's a really exciting option for those of you who want to grow a business, either for a company you're working at right now or your own family business. Okay, let me just give you some details on how the L1 works. It's about $1,000 in government filing fees. There's also a $2,500 premium processing fee if you want a decision in 15 calendar days, as opposed to waiting like 3 to 7 months. There are time limits. So if you're coming into work as specialized knowledge, you have a 5-year limit. There is no extending till you get your green card like in the H-1B. So if you're coming in on the L-1B, and if you want to stay permanently in the US, you have to start thinking pretty quickly about how you could have a green card after your 5 years finish. For managers and executives, you get 7 years. And there is a green card for international managers. So what a lot of my clients do is they work here for about 4 or 5 years as a manager, and then they apply for a green card for the international manager, because that process takes 2-3 years. So then it times nicely with the end of their 7 years, then they have a green card to continue working in the US. And then the bonus about the L1 is that your spouse gets work authorization. So especially for those family businesses, I have a lot of clients actually who have come to me through idea to IPO. A lot of family businesses that are doing great in their home country. Let's say they have 60 or 70 employees in Pakistan or Indonesia, and then they start a smaller office here. The spouse, when she or he comes with the principal L1, they actually start to work in that family business, growing it here. So then there's two of you working. Okay, so that's the L1. Let me tell you about this option. So this is a complete change from an international manager or executive. This is for more junior folks. And this is a J1 visa. And this is for people who want to get a training experience or an internship experience in the United States. This is a fantastic option if studying here is too expensive and you want to just at least get some, network established, experience, improve your English. This is a great option. Now, it is limited, meaning it's for 12 months. If you are someone who is still in college or just graduated a year ago, up to a year ago, it's just really junior professional, you can come and intern here for up to 1 year. You can also work here as a trainee for up to 18 months if you have been, you're a pretty recent graduate and you haven't worked for more than 5 years. So if you're interested in working for a startup here or an emerging company, the J1 is a great option for you. It's not available to you if you want to start your own company and come work here. The one thing to keep in mind is that if you are a national of, let's say, a developing country, then you could be subject to what is called a 2-year home residency requirement, meaning after you finish your traineeship, so even if it's just 6 months or even if it's just 1 year, you would have to go home and work and live there for 2 years before you could come back to the US. Okay, now there are waivers available, and I've certainly gotten those for my clients. They've come here and interned here for a summer, and then they go back to Russia, and suddenly they have this 2-year home residency requirement, and they can't come back to the US for 2 years. So we have applied for waivers, and we have gotten them. Okay, so there are solutions to this, but it's something you should be aware of if you decide to do this program, which is, am I going to be subject to the 2-year home residency requirement if I get a J1? Okay, so that is the J1. It's again, great option. This option is for certain nationals. So certain countries have trade agreements with the United States. And if that country has a trade agreement with the United States, you are eligible for an E-visa for treaty traders or investors. So this is different from what used to be the $1 million green card. Now it's 1.85 million, and that program is suspended right now. But this is for, for people who are, first of all, a national of a treaty country. So when I send you the slides, this link that's in there, it's a hyperlink. It'll take you to the list of countries. It's about 70 odd countries have a treaty with the United States. And it's not intuitive, okay? Like Pakistan is one of them. The BRIC countries are certainly do not have treaties with the United States. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, no. Peru, Chile, these countries, Chile does, Peru, think countries like even Portugal, which is a European country. So you have to look at this list to see if there's a treaty with your country. And if there is, then if you have a company that is at least 50% owned by you or a company of, let's say your home country, then you could get a visa for trade in the United States or investment. So now, like trade, it's more goods. I'm from Pakistan originally, and a lot of Pakistanis have an E1 visa for the trade of textiles, towels, rugs, spices, these kinds of things, because it's just goods. And most of the trade is happening with the United States. So they have a visa to facilitate that trade, right? The other one that I do a lot of, though, are the E2 for investment. And what that means is you have money, or let's say a company, a perfect example is BMW. Germany has a treaty with the United States. BMW is a German company. They use the e-visa to bring people over to the US to work for BMW, the US, BMW North America, okay? And they invested money in creating these offices or in factories or sales ships, whatever, in the United States, and they're transferring people here. Okay. So Japan is a big user of the e-visa, Germany, but you don't have to be BMW or a big Japanese company like Toyota. You can also be a small family business, or you can have money. You don't have to have a business in your home country, but let's say you have like $100,000 and you want to open up a business in the United States, then you could invest it in the US to start a business. But it has to be a real business that is operating, and it makes more money than just for you and your family to live on. Okay. So a perfect, example of what is not allowed is, why don't I just buy an apartment in San Francisco? Those cost so much money, and that's my investment. And can I get an e-visa? No, that is not a real and operating business. Okay. But what I do have clients doing is buying a little gelato shop in San Diego, right? It didn't cost a whole lot of money. It cost maybe like $80,000. They bought a small gelato shop. They're from Italy. They came over to run it. I also have clients, for example, who study here. And after their studies, they decide they want to start a business. So one client of mine, he is Canadian, originally from Hong Kong, has a lot of money, got an inheritance. And he decided, he went to film school in LA, and then he decided, I'm going to start my own film studio. So he transferred about 150,000 of his own money into the US to start a film studio. I have another client, she went to law school here. She's from Korea. She decided to start her own law firm after graduating. So she put in about $120,000 to the United States to start her own law firm. Okay. So that's how the E works. It's, people always ask me, what's the lowest amount of money I need to invest? And there's really nothing in the law. The law just says what is reasonable. So I'll often do internet research on like how much money does it cost to start a film studio? And I'll include that in the application. And I'll say, look, officer, this is how much money one needs to start a film studio. This is what this person has spent and invested X more, right? So that's how the E2 works. It's a great visa if you are a national of a treaty company and you want to start a business here. It's a great, great visa. Let me just tell you some logistics. You generally apply at the US consulate in your home country. So again, if you're from Japan and you want to start a business here, you would apply at the US consulate in Tokyo. The fee is about $270. Now, the good news is it's valid indefinitely. Okay. So you could actually just renew it every 5 years. Of course, you can't stay here 30, 40 years, but definitely if you're doing a great job on your business and you have ties in your home country and you say, I've got this business here and I'm growing it and I got employees and it's making money and I'm paying taxes and I'm doing all this spending, but I'm going to go back home eventually, then they'll keep renewing it for you, or you'll keep renewing it. And again, the bonus here is that your spouse can work. So this is, again, if you and your spouse want to come over and start a business here, this is great because your spouse can work and you can work, and then you can grow this business together. Okay, so that is the E visa. Let's see. All right. Now this one is the O1 visa, and it's for individuals of extraordinary ability. It's a really fun visa. And I encourage you to, not be modest and not be shy about even thinking, you might be thinking, oh, I don't know if I'm extraordinary, and you may not be right now, but I'm going to tell you what the criteria is. And then I'm going to encourage you to think about creating opportunities for yourself where you start to build that evidence. And so it's something you could put in your back pocket as an option down the road. What does it require to be an individual of extraordinary ability? Well, we have to show that you have, this word is sustained. What that means is you have national or international recognition in the sciences, arts, education, business, or athletics. And when I say sustained, it means more than just like one newspaper article or more than stuff in like the last 6 months. They want to see a body of recognition. Okay. And you have to be coming to the US to work in your area of extraordinary ability. And you do need an employer to sponsor you. Now, the interesting thing about the O1, that employer could be you. Okay, so you can sponsor yourself for the O1. It is valid for 3 years at first and then renewable in 1 year increments, again, indefinitely. A lot of actually movie stars have this O1, models. A lot of artists use the O1. They just come temporarily. They have agents as their sponsors. So that's, for folks like that, you can just keep renewing, because a lot of people don't want a green card for tax reasons. The unfortunate piece with the O is that your spouse cannot work. Okay. So what are the criteria for the O? You have to show at least 3 of the following 8 criteria. Okay. One is national or international awards in your field, published material about you or your work, scholarly articles. So set up that Google Scholar profile. That's government's going to go straight there and look for you there, because it shows all the articles you published, how many times those articles have been cited. And so that's something, if you're serious about this, set up that Google Scholar page or start writing articles. Judging the work of others in your field. So one is that you're asked to judge the work of others and you do it. Okay. So this is more for like in academia, you're asked to review scholarly articles, peer reviewed articles. That's kind of historically what this category or this criteria was about. But we definitely, for a lot of my tech entrepreneurs, there's all these like hackathons and, pitch to an investor kind of events. And we'll say, oh, well, my client was invited to attend this pitch session because he's considered this really advanced entrepreneur. The next element is associations or membership in associations that require outstanding achievement. So you have to apply and be selected. Important and original contributions to your field. So usually this is like a patent. And then we also now have to show that the patent is being widely used. Because a lot of companies like Apple, Facebook, they just have these patents. They have tons and tons of patents. And so when we say, for a lot of my clients, if they've gotten that patent while working at Apple, the government actually comes back and says, well, is that patent being used? Because that's how then we know there was a contribution. It's the patent applications by themselves are definitely not enough. And now getting a patent, the government's very interested in like, well, is it actually being used? Then the next element is a high salary compared to others. And then the final is employment in a critical role for a distinguished organization. Okay, so we have to show both that you're working in a critical role and the company where you're working is has a great reputation, is distinguished, etc. So those are the 8 criteria, and you have to show at least 3. We try to show as many as possible. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to focus on are just a few visas that are for certain nationalities. Number 1, Australians. There's a high skilled visa. It's called E3. This is for Australians. It's just like the H-1B. It has you have to be a position that requires a bachelor's degree. You have to show that you are paid the prevailing wage, and it's not for someone to just start their own company and sponsor themselves. Okay, it's exactly like the H-1B. It's just for Australians. It's called the E3, and it is valid indefinitely. So there's not the 6-year limit, and the spouse can work. So it's a great visa for Australians. There's technically a limit of 10,500 every year. It never gets reached. So we don't have a problem. There's tons of visas available in this category. The next one is for Canadians and Mexicans. This is called a TN visa. And you have to be coming to work in a certain profession that's listed on the treaty schedule. So there's a schedule of occupations that was listed on the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is now called USMCA. And so it's pretty limited. There is a role for engineers. There is a role for economists, which a lot of my finance kind of roles go in. And then there's a category for management consultants, but it is pretty limited. Okay, so nothing businessy is in there other than management consultant. So you have to be coming to work in one of those professions. There's no wage requirement. And again, it's not for starting your own company. So you can't start your own company and sponsor yourself for the TN. You can stay in 3-year increments. You can renew indefinitely, but the spouses cannot work. Okay, so just real quick, again, I'll just ask everyone to mute themselves. We have about almost 100 people, so it'd be great if you could mute yourself. We're coming up to the end of the presentation too, so I'll be opening up for questions, and I'll be looking at all the chat messages, which there's a few of, which is great. So the last nationality specific visa is for Chileans and Singaporeans. I mentioned that earlier when I mentioned the H-1B. This is a high skilled worker just for Chileans and Singaporeans, 5,400 for Singaporeans, 1,400 for Chileans, never used up entirely. The job offered must be a specialty occupation, meaning we need to show it requires a bachelor's degree. There's a prevailing wage requirement. And again, it's not a visa if you want to start your own company and sponsor yourself. It's not one unless you're a minority owner shareholder. If you start a company with someone else and you have a smaller interest or minority interest, you could possibly apply. But it's really for an employer-employee relationship. The annoying thing about the H-1B one is that it's only good for 1 year, like at a time. You can renew, but you have to renew every year, and that's kind of annoying. And unfortunately, the spouses are not eligible for work authorization. Okay, this is the avenues for permanent residence. I want to just talk about this really quickly. There are 5 primary ways to get a green card to the United States. Number 1 is through employment. So you have an employer sponsoring you. Within that, there's multiple subcategories. There could be a test of a labor market. Your work could be in the national interest. You could be an international manager. You could be an individual of extraordinary ability. Those are all sort of subcategories under the employment-based route. Then the next route is family. There's a number of categories of relatives that qualify for a green card based on a family relationship. There's the annual green card lottery. There's about 15 million people apply. It's for 50,000 green cards, and they are from countries where there's just not a lot of nationals in the United States. So that's why it's called a diversity visa lottery. It's basically to promote diversity in the United States. So if you're from like India, China, UK, Canada, Mexico, these kinds of countries, you cannot apply. And the lottery period is currently open. It's going to close next week, I believe. So one of the things, and I'll mention this again at the end, is I'll add all of you to my email listserv. You please unsubscribe, but if not, if you're interested, all of this, the green card lottery, H-1B lottery, all the different developments that happen in immigration, I do send out alerts on a regular basis, so you can get these updates. The fourth way of getting a green card is through asylum. Asylum is where you are afraid to return to your home country for certain reasons. Okay. And so I can discuss that with you. I've done a lot of work in asylum, so I can also help on that side. And then finally, it's the investment-based green card. That's where you invest 1.8 million or about 900,000 if it's in an economically depressed area, and you can get a green card. This program is right now in flux, and so the Congress is figuring out how to extend this program. Now, once you get a green card, you can get citizenship after 5 years. You can apply to become a US citizen after 5 years of having a green card, or 3 years if you are married to a US citizen. Okay, so that's the pathway to a green card. Let me just mention really quickly some common obstacles to getting your visa or being allowed to enter the United States. One is, I mentioned during the J1 slide, and that is there's a 2-year home residency requirement, right? So if you came in as a trainee or intern and you are subject to the 2-year home residency requirement, you're not going to be able to get a visa to come back to the US, even if you're married to an American. You have to complete it. To get a green card, to get an H-1B, the only exception is for journalists. There's a special visa for journalists. And then if you are someone of extraordinary ability, but you're only allowed to be here temporarily until you complete that 2-year home residency requirement. If you have previously visited the United States and overstayed by more than 180 days, you're not going to be allowed to come back in. So you want to be very careful that you comply with the amount of time you are given to stay in the United States, and you leave before then, or you file for an extension. Another problem could be if you complete the visa application and say that, no, this hasn't happened, or I've never done that, or I've never worked without authorization, and the government has its own way of finding that, oh no, you actually did this, or oh, you did that, or then you will not be allowed in for someone who did not complete their application truthfully. And then the final issue is if you have any kind of criminal record. And that means if you've been arrested, you've been charged, you're in the middle of a proceeding, anything like that is going to make it much harder for you to get a visa. And you should talk to an immigration attorney about what are your options to come to the US. We often have people who, this is very sad, but, they've had an accident and someone has died. And so they are being charged with manslaughter. Those kinds of trials are going on for years. During that, it's very hard to get a visa to come to the US. And of course, once you're here, what often happens, especially with some of my younger clients, is they get DUIs. That's when you drive under the influence. And that also can be a problem for future immigration benefits. So it's important, if that is an issue, to talk to your immigration lawyer about, what do I do? How do I explain this? What do I say to the government? What records do I need to show? And I want to also tell you, oftentimes countries will erase the record, but you still need to tell the US authorities. Okay, so that's criminal issues. Now, right now, as you probably know, there are travel restrictions from about 33 countries. The list of countries is right up here, from Brazil, China, India, Iran, European Schengen area. That's the 26 states, UK, Ireland, and South Africa. So travel from there right now has been restricted for most travelers, unless, of course, you're a US citizen, or you have a green card, or you're the parent of a US citizen. There are certain exceptions. Also, since those restrictions were in place, if it was in the national interest to let you in, then there was you could travel. However, these restrictions are going to lift on November 8th, and it's going to be if you are fully vaccinated. I have a blog post on this on my website. You can check it out. It explains what fully vaccinated means. You also will have to show proof of a negative COVID test up to 3 days before boarding. And if you are not vaccinated, there are very, very few exceptions. So you probably won't be able to travel. So that is where we are right now with the travel restrictions. Thank God they're almost coming to an end. It's been very difficult up until now, but by November 8th, these should be lifting. Okay. I wanted to let you know about I have a podcast series. It's just, now it's actually 13. I should update that slide. But it's about 13 episodes covering the different visa categories. And then I have interviews with an asylum officer, a former asylum officer, a former immigration judge, a criminal defense attorney, and even an attorney with 30 years of experience at the Department of Labor on testing the labor market. One of my most popular episodes, though, is a conversation with a professional recruiter. This is someone who's been recruiting for tech companies in the Bay Area for the last 30 years. And so she and I had a conversation about how foreign nationals, can really stand out and also overcome any resistance by employers to the visa sponsorship process. So you can check that out. People really like to listen to that one. And then, this is my small team. We're a bit bigger now. We're about 7 now, but we're a small team of, very dedicated immigration professionals. Most of us have either immigrated to the US or have sponsored our spouses for green cards. And you have all my contact details. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. And I, of course, will add you to my email list. You can just unsubscribe if you already get too many newsletters in your inbox or in your email, but I will continue to provide updates to you on immigration issues. So that is the end of my presentation. I am going to now turn to the questions. Let's see here. I love all the different countries. I'm sure you guys have already seen, we've got San Francisco, France, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Dallas, Nigeria, Mexico, Israel, Kenya, wonderful. Saudi Arabia. Okay, how to pitch for a startup visa. I am via UK. So right now there's no startup visa. There is something called the International Entrepreneur Parole Program. I didn't really get into that here because it's got very high requirements for funding, and it's usually from US funders. So I'm thinking most of you are from overseas. So it may be hard to get that kind of those US very specific investors. But there's no startup visa. I think the visas that if you have a startup, you want to look at are the O1 visa if you're someone of extraordinary ability, and that's why you're creating a company, or the investor visa if you are a national of a treaty country. Okay, so that's really how to maybe use to get a visa for a startup. Okay. So here's a question. Tech professional with 8 years full stack development experience would like to know, study or job, what's a more achievable path? Well, I think it really depends on your background. If you don't have a degree, it sounds like studying would be a good pathway. It's very expensive, but that could be, if you want to even do a certificate program or job. I think I really don't, I can't answer what's more achievable. I think both are achievable. I think it's really the specifics of your background and your network. So I would encourage you to, try to network, look for employers. The good news is, in today's world, with so much remote work, you could probably work for a US company from where you are right now, and then over time become so valuable to them that they will sponsor you for a visa. Okay. I am from Bangladesh. My project is an automated e-commerce solution. My two co-partners live in the US, and one other new investor interested for investment in my project. Can you please inform me which visa is better for me to visit the US? Well, if it's to visit, I would get a B1 visa. And then insofar as, yeah, I mean, I think it's more, to visit is the visitor visa, I would say. And then insofar as what visa, I would have to look up if Bangladesh is an investor visa, has a treaty with the United States, but you would need to be at least 50% owner. So I see you have two co-partners, another new investor. You'd have to be at least 50% owner of the company. If Bangladesh is a treaty country, we'd have to double check that. Otherwise, if you have a minority share, and depending on your educational background, it could be that your company could sponsor you for the H-1B in the lottery. Okay. Does it matter what subject the master's degree is in? I'm not sure if this is for the H-1B lottery. It's so long as it's a US master's degree, it doesn't matter what it is for the lottery. If you're talking about the STEM OPT extension, it has to be a STEM field, but I'm not sure if I answered your question. Okay. What happens? This is a really good question. What happens if you get fired, if you come in on an H-1B visa? Well, you have 60 days to find a new employer, and then they can just transfer your H to the new employer if it's under 60 days. If it's looking like in 60 days you're not going to find an employer, you should change your status to visitor, or you should depart the US. But and I do want to let you know that if you haven't used your full 6 years of H-1B time, you actually can use that later when you do find an employer. So if it's taking you more than 60 days, you don't want to change your status to visitor, you're thinking, you know what, I'm just going to go home, rest, maybe take a break. You go home, the H-1B time of the 6 years that you haven't used is still available to you at any time to use again. Can someone under an F2 visa with a US degree be sponsored by a US company? Yes, for an H-1B. I mean, you can't work on the F2 visa, but you could be sponsored by a US company for the H-1B lottery or another visa that is good for you to work. We are working in India and we have to launch our product in the USA, and I have business partner in US. Please suggest to me how I can come in the US in Philly. The visitor visa, that's the best way to start, is to come in as a visitor. Is the cap exemption for nonprofits, universities, hospitals, or other type of organizations? It's for universities, nonprofit research organizations. So not just nonprofit. It's not for any nonprofit. It has to be for a nonprofit research organization or universities. Those are the organizations that are exempt from the lottery. Once you get into the H-1B lottery and later you leave the USA, the next time you want to come in on H-1B visa, do I need to participate in the lottery system again? Not unless you have used up all 6 years. If you haven't used up all 6 years, you are still eligible to come in and use the remaining time. If I am part of an LLC as a partner, can I apply for the H-1B visa? I'll be running the commercial area. I don't know what your job duties would be. We would have to make sure they require a bachelor's degree. We'd have to make sure you're going to be offered a prevailing wage. We have to make sure there's enough work for you. But we also have to make sure you're a minority owner. So you're a partner, but what's the share? Is it 50-50, or is it like you have 20% and the other person has 80? So there's a lot of factors that go into being sponsored for the H-1B by the LLC. But we have to definitely make sure that you are not a 50% owner or more. We have to make sure there's enough work for you, that it's a real entity, that you're going to be paid the prevailing wage, and that your job that you're going to be do there. I'll be running the commercial area. I don't know, what that means. We have to see that the job running the commercial area would require a bachelor's degree. Is there a minimum investment amount or number of workers employed that is necessary for E2 for Canada? No minimum investment amount, no number of workers employed that is necessary. As a practical matter, the government generally likes to see investments of 100,000 or more US dollars. And of course, by the time you're going, you should have a business plan where you plan on hiring workers. And certainly at the renewal stage, they're going to want to see employees working for you. Can you sponsor yourself for the O? Yes. Can you go through an agency for the O? Yes. Someone here made, okay, TN is a great visa for engineers, low cost and fast. Yep, that is true. So the comment back was TN visa is temporary. How can you get from TN to green card permanent residence? You can have your employer sponsor you. There's multiple pathways. You could be sponsored by a test of the labor market. You could be someone whose work is in the national interest. You could be working as an individual of extraordinary ability. There's green cards for those folks too. So it really depends, but you can go from a TN to the green card. You just have to be strategic about it. Okay, this is a great question. For the e-visa, what does it mean to invest? Does it mean to have spent, say, 70,000? What if my business doesn't need to spend that amount of cash immediately, but can prove the cash is available? Yeah, we need to transfer that money to the US, to a US bank account. Okay, we need to make sure it's available. So it's not what some people try to do is they transfer it to the US, and then after they get the visa, they transfer it back. I don't recommend doing that, because when you go for your renewals, it's, that could show up. But you definitely don't need to spend all of it. That is for sure. My client who started her law firm, she invested about 120,000. She probably spent 20 at the start, but she showed that she had wired all that money. That money was sitting in the bank account to pay her legal assistant, to pay the rent, to pay her insurance, etc. So you're absolutely right. You just need to show that that cash is available. Okay. Any suggested visa for an international entrepreneur establishing a holding company in Delaware as a C-type company? I think it would depend. If you're a national of a treaty country, you could have an E possibly. A holding company doesn't sound like it's a real and operating enterprise. Maybe you could go for the O, depending on if you have expertise. I don't think a holding, I'm not sure. I think that the options will be limited for if it's a holding company. Okay. Does anyone know if there's any chance to get hired with a J1 visa? I came to the US with a J1 visa. I got an interview, then I didn't get the offer because it's hard to change my visa. So yeah, I think, are you trying to say that you came in on the J and then it is hard for them to sponsor you for another visa, because probably the best visa for you was the H1B, and that is a lottery. You may also have been subject to the 2-year home residence requirement. I don't know. You'd have to look on your visa sticker to see if you were subject. It says it. The other option is the O1 visa. Please okay, so there's a person who wanted to know about the H1B. Yep, I'll add you on my mailing list. When the lottery opens next year, I start emailing out updates that the lottery will be opening for the H1B. And of course, I certainly mention when it's closed and when the registrations have been selected. So this person wants to work as a CEO on the H-1B visa. That is extremely hard, because that's basically saying you're in charge. And when you're in charge, you're not an employee. So that's very hard unless you have a board of directors to which you will be responding to. So I currently use STEM OPT. Okay, let's see here. I currently used, STEM OPT as a full-time employee in a company, but also have a business with my co-founder who is US citizen and has major stock. My question is, what visa can I leverage for the online education business I have with my friend? So if you are a national of a treaty company, you could go for the E2, but you would need to invest money and you would need to be 50% owner. If you have expertise, in this online education area, then you could go for the O1. If you have a minority share in the company, it's possible. I would need to know your degree background and your education background. And what wage you would get paid. But you could have your company sponsor you for the H-1B. But we have to make sure there's enough money to pay you and there's enough work for you. For family-based green card, how long does the sibling sponsorship process take? So this depends on what country you are born in. If you were born in India, Mexico, Philippines, it's going to take longer than for most other nationalities, but it's anywhere between 13 to 24 years. How can we get reworded videos of this presentation? We will share the slide, the recording of this presentation. Is there an express route for tech, especially AI and machine learning? Unfortunately, there is not. How can we get all your podcasts? You can go on my website. My podcasts are available there. I'm also on iTunes. Okay. For an F1, can you work while studying? You could possibly get CPT. It's part-time curricular practical training. You could also get an emergency authorization to work if you are having, just a hardship. So you should talk to your school about if you can work while studying. But while studying, it's limited to curricular practical training, CPT, or it's hardship. I'm a PhD holder. Does PhD help and considered as an achievement for O1 visa? Yes, usually PhDs have a lot of publications. Their dissertation is often original. They've given conference papers, so it could help, absolutely. What causes delay in appointment booking for visa application? Do you process Canadian and work visas? I do not handle Canadian and Australian work visas. I can definitely refer you to attorneys in Australia and Canada who handle work authorization for there. What causes delay in appointment booking? I mean, right now it's all delayed because of COVID. There's just a lot of the consulates are not operating at full capacity. So it's taking a very long time to get a visa appointment scheduled. If you've invested in a business in the US, is it possible to use that to relocate? Well, if you're a national of a treaty country, and it's a real and operating business and you're coming in to oversee that investment, yeah. Okay, so my family, all adults, just arrived in Austin, Texas to scout out locations for headquarters for our Delaware C Corp family tech startup and to grow our American network. We are all Canadian citizens, but also have Filipino passports. Parents are retired. Myself, brother, and sister only have high school degrees. Any recommendations for what visas to pursue? So I mean, I think the e-visa could work because Canada has a treaty. So an investor visa, certainly. If your parents are retired, I don't know how they would be working for the company. So we'd have to think about getting them on the company payroll. I also think that that's a pretty large number of people to try and get the e-visa on. But I would say that e-visa is possible even with just the high school degrees. I mean, if you have expertise in the startup that you're creating, then that should be fine. Someone's asking me about investing in, about $100,000. Yeah, you could either use that money to come study in the US, like a master's degree, and then get the 3 years of work authorization. If you're doing a STEM degree, you could also use that money to start a company in the US on the E2 because Pakistan does have a treaty with the United States. Let's see. So here's a business owner in Mexico in R&D tech mostly. I would like to open an office in the USA to expand my clients and start selling my services to US businesses. Any advice on what visa to get? I would say the L1 new office. You could try that one. You could also do the E2 investor visa because you're from Mexico and Mexico has a treaty. And then you could also just come to the US as a business visitor if you don't want to live here. And you could certainly open an office and sell your services and then go back to Mexico. You could just use a visitor visa. How can we buy existing business in Canada or USA that will give us permanent residence? Unfortunately, I don't know about Canada, but for US, if you search online for businesses, it doesn't give you permanent residence unless the business is at least 1.85 million. So you make a $1.85 million investment and you employ 10 employees. That's how you would get permanent residence. Does the E2 visa work on a purchase franchise chain? Yes, it can. It can. How long does it take to get the E2 visa? To prepare all the materials probably will take about a month, like 2 to 4 weeks. And then the consulate takes about 6 weeks to process it. And then you get the visa and you can come into the United States. It's a 5-year visa. You get 2 years when you come in. It's an I-94 and then you have to leave and come back or you can extend. Is the recording of the presentation going to be available? Yep. I'm an RF design expert. I do YouTube videos on RF design to teach fellow designers around the world. Does it help for an O1 visa? If you're an expert in the field, there's the 8 criteria. If you can show at least three criteria, that there's media coverage about you, that you have a lot of viewers. The interesting thing is you could try and argue that you're in the arts. That's a little bit more relaxed of a standard. But yeah, I would just revisit those 8 criteria and see if you could qualify. Can an H-1B holder invest money in stocks market regularly? Yes. Okay, you would like me to link you up with Canada and Australian attorney that handle work visas? Okay, just send me an email and I will send you names of a Canadian and Australian attorney. Yeah, this person makes a good point that, the requirement for the O1 is acclaim and recognition. A small YouTube channel is probably not sufficient, and he's right. Okay, so I think we got to the end of this. So we will be wrapping up now. We, again, just email me. Hold on. Yes, we are going to send out the recording of the presentation. Okay. So yeah, so you will know where to find me. You have my emails. I hope we will be sending out a copy of the slides and the presentation. So for those of you who missed it, please go ahead and you can check those out and then email me if you would like to set up a consultation. There is a consultation fee. My consultation fee is $300. And I'm happy to set up something with you by Zoom to talk and, work through options for you. There's just a couple more questions coming in and then we are going to have to wrap up. I'm a teacher. I teach creative writing. I don't have any documents to prove it except my income tax return. So I don't think there's any visa available for a creative writing teacher. But if you do find someone in the US, like let's say a school wants to sponsor you to work for them as a creative writing teacher, they could sponsor you for the H-1B visa. But you will need to show that you have a degree in writing or English or something that is a match with the position. What are your thoughts on how software engineers with 4 years experience can immigrate and work permanently in either Canada or USA? So I think you're going to need to find an employer to sponsor you. And then usually, the H-1B is the most common route, depending on what country you're from. There could be a visa specific to your country of nationality. So I think the key is to look online, look in your network, find an employer in the US who would sponsor you for an employment visa. Okay, that's for the USA. This is a really good question. When applying for jobs online, there's a question, are you legally allowed to work in the US? What does it mean? Having a clear record to apply for the sponsorship, or does it mean you won't require a sponsorship in the future? I think it means that you don't require sponsorship. I know that there's that question. I would still encourage you to apply. And that's where my podcast on, tech recruiters, I have a podcast episode with a tech recruiter and she talks about this, and I would encourage you to apply. But I think the best way is if you want to work somewhere, this was her big tip. If you want to work at a particular company in the US, you need to find someone in that company and then that person will refer you for a job opening. And that is the best way to get a job in the US, is to have that inside referral, employee referral, because, people get hundreds of resumes online and a recruiter and sometimes hiring people don't have time. So if a friend of yours goes up to that hiring person and says, I have a friend sitting in Indonesia or Pakistan or India, and, I think he'd be really great. That's a great way. The other way is to just start working for those companies in your home country, Brazil, India, China, wherever. And then after a couple of years, you should be having those discussions with them. Hey, are you going to sponsor me for a visa? And usually I see a lot of companies willing to do that. Okay, so again, connect with me on LinkedIn. We are definitely going to be sending you the slides and a recording of this presentation. And I look forward to staying in touch with you and remaining a resource to you on US immigration matters. Thanks so much for attending the presentation. Take care and good luck to all of you.